The Brazilian Carnival is known as the biggest popular festival on the planet. Millions of people in the streets, tourists from all over the world arriving to experience days of pure revelry, breathtaking parades, electric trios that draw crowds, and blocks where the joy seems endless. It's an explosion of colors, music, and energy that puts Brazil in the global spotlight. But what if I told you that behind all this brilliance, there is a hidden side that not many people talk about? A dark side full of behind-the-scenes stories that don't appear on TV. But first, let's be clear. The idea is not to pour water on the revelry or say that Carnival is all bad. Far from it. Carnival is one of the most beautiful, creative, and important festivals in Brazilian culture, attracting millions of people and drawing attention from all over the world. But it's not all party. Behind the lavish costumes, the drumming, and the contagious joy, there are problems that many people prefer to ignore. Corruption, millionaire schemes, crimes, and tragedies lurk behind the scenes of this grandiose celebration. Today, Bello Mundo takes you to see this other side of Carnival. Hold on, because what you're about to see and hear could change the way you see this festival. Number 1. Where did all this glitter come from? Let's start with medieval Europe. Some scholars say that Carnival dates back to pagan festivals, such as winter festivals, harvest celebrations, and even fertility rituals. With the arrival of Christianity, these festivities were incorporated, in a way, into the religious calendar just before Lent, that period when the faithful dedicate themselves to penance and fasting. The word carnival comes from the Latin carnem levare, something like farewell to meat. The meaning was as follows. Before entering Lent, when meat consumption and parties were restricted, there was a period of revelry, almost like a farewell to the pleasures of the flesh. In other words, it was basically an excuse to make the most of it before facing the restrictions. When these traditions arrived in Brazil, the European carnival met the African and indigenous cultures that were already here. The result? A party that only Brazil knows how to throw. In the 17th and 18th centuries, the business was intrudo. People took to the streets throwing water, flour, and paint at everyone. No one escaped. It was fun for some, annoying for others, and so messy that the elite tried to ban it several times, but to no avail. Even so, the intrudo ended up becoming the embryo of the street parties we know today. In the 19th century, Rio de Janeiro saw the emergence of carnival societies, with more chic parades and balls attended by the elite. However, the locals continued to play in the streets, and that's when the ranchos and cordões emerged. The ranchos used marching bands and costumes, while the cordões relied on percussion and parades. And samba, it arrived in this mix. At the end of the 19th century, Rio's black communities began to create this unique sound, mixing African drumming with polkas and modinhas. It was from this movement that the first samba schools emerged, such as Deixa Falar, Mangueira, and Portela, which began to parade with themes and costumes. In the 30s, official competitions and the samba enredo were introduced, and Carnival began to look the way it does today. By the 60s, the rules had been defined, and the Sapucaí Sambadrome, inaugurated in 1984, consolidated Rio's carnival as the biggest in the world. In São Paulo, the first samba schools appeared in the 30s, but the parade only became more important in the 60s and 70s. Today, the Anhembi Sambadrome is also the stage for fierce competitions between major schools such as Vai Vai, Rosas de Ouro, Gaviões da Fiel, Mocidade Alegre, and others. Despite the famous parades in Rio and São Paulo, Carnival goes much further. In Salvador, the electric trios and axé music draw millions of people to the Barra Ondina and Campo Grande circuits. In Recife and Olinda, Frevo music takes over the streets, and the Galo da Madrugada is a spectacle in itself. The fact is that the party is Brazilian, no matter where it takes place. The rhythm may change, but there is something that all these celebrations have in common. Behind the music, the costumes, and the joy, there is a less colorful side to Carnival. That's when things start to get more complicated. So let's start talking about this darker side, and of course about money. After all, who pays for all this? Number 2. The involvement of the bicheiros. One of the major sources of the dirty money that underpins Carnival is the money from the game of the bicho. For those who don't know, the game of bicho is an illegal lottery that is very popular in Brazil. It works like this. The player chooses a number associated with an animal. It could be a lion, a rabbit, a horse, and so on. If the number of the animal drawn is the same as the one you chose, you win. It sounds simple, but the game moves an absurd amount of money and operates completely outside the law. It's the famous bicheiros who control this scheme, and we're not talking about people who deal with little. They deal with fortunes. Although it is illegal, gambling has never ceased to exist, especially in Rio de Janeiro, where it ended up mixing with other areas of society, including Carnival. This relationship goes back a long way, but it was in the 80s that it gained more visibility. With the construction of the Marquês de Sapucaí Sambadrome, designed by Oscar Niemeyer, Rio's Carnival gained the status of a monumental spectacle, and the bicheiros took advantage of the stage, both behind the scenes and in the spotlight. One of the most emblematic names in this story is Castor de Andrade, patron of Mocidade Independente de Padre Miguel. He wasn't discreet. In the parade of 1991, for example, Castor celebrated his 65th birthday in the middle of the school's assembly. There was no shortage of cake and candles, but the highlight was a banquet fit for royalty, with lobster mousse, shrimp in tartare sauce, and surubim with toast. While in Rio, the bicheiros vied for fame and territory as patrons of samba schools, in São Paulo it was a different story. There, Ivo Noal, nicknamed Il Capo di Tutti Capi, or the boss of all bosses, reigned alone. Just to give you an idea, at the beginning of the 2000 years, at the age of 65, his assets were estimated at more than 500 million reais, something around $2.5 billion in adjusted values, around $500 million. Investigators at the time identified more than 70 properties in his name, as well as a fleet of helicopters, an aviation company, and even a domestic utensils factory. These patrons invested heavily in the samba schools, financing lavish costumes, floats, and all the infrastructure needed to compete. But of course, this wasn't just for the love of revelry. These investments guaranteed power, influence, and often control over the decisions of the associations. And it wasn't just in the Sambadrome. The influence of the bicheiros also reached the trios elétricos of Salvador, the street blocks of Belo Horizonte, and the grandiose structures of Recife and Olinda. From samba to frevo to axé, where there's a big carnival, there's money flowing, and in many cases it comes from schemes like this. Number 3. Criminal factions, PCC and other organizations. If for a long time Carnival was almost exclusively the territory of the bicheiros when it came to suspicious financing, in recent years other criminal factions have begun to enter the game. Among them is the First Capital Command, or simply PCC. The PCC is one of the largest and most feared criminal factions in Brazil. It emerged in the early 90s, inside prisons in São Paulo, with the justification of uniting prisoners against abuses in the prison system. But over time, the faction became a money machine. Today, it dominates drug and arms trafficking in much of the country, and even abroad. The group operates like a real company, with a hierarchy, division of tasks, and international reach. And what does this have to do with Carnival? Well, if before the bicheros were the only ones with suspicious funding at the party, now factions like the PCC have also started to get involved. In São Paulo, for example, investigations show that members of the PCC may have injected money into samba schools, such as Vai Vai. This doesn't mean that the entire school is compromised, but there are indications that members of the faction have used Carnival to move funds of illegal origin. For organizations like the PCC, Carnival is a strategic opportunity. Firstly, because it is a gigantic showcase with millions of people watching, tourists commenting, and enormous visibility. Secondly, because it's the perfect setting for laundering money. The festival moves huge amounts of money in a short space of time. Costumes, floats, sound, lighting, public and private sponsorship. And in the midst of all this hustle and bustle, it's easier to inflate costs, issue false invoices, and hide the money that comes from illicit activities. In the street parties, the situation also favors crime. Carnival attracts crowds with people from all over concentrated in a few square meters. For those who sell drugs, this is the perfect environment to do business without attracting attention. Factions like the PCC take advantage of this scenario and organize themselves to make big profits during the party. But do you think that only organized crime profits from this? Not really. There is another kind of carnival scam, and it comes from a different class: politicians and businessmen. Unfortunately, Carnival also attracts crooks in suits and ties. Overpriced contracts, front companies, and strategic deals have become the norm in many cases. There are allegations that public funds, which should go to health, education, and security, end up being diverted into private pockets under the pretext of promoting culture. In the end, the glitter of the festivities hides a complicated reality. Both criminal gangs and corrupt politicians see Carnival as the perfect opportunity to line their own pockets. Number 4. Carnival crime, robberies, thefts, and scams. Unfortunately, Carnival is also the time when opportunistic crimes explode. Theft of cell phones, wallets, and documents all hit record highs during this period. And it's not just in Rio and São Paulo. Salvador, Recife, Belo Horizonte, practically all cities with street parties face the same problem. Who hasn't heard a story like this? The person is enjoying the bloco, dancing, and the next thing they know, their cell phone is gone. And what about card scams? These are growing alarmingly. It works like this: someone sells you a drink or snack, and you pay by card. But the machine has been tampered with. At the time, everything seems fine, but when the bill arrives, the amount charged is absurdly higher than what you bought. This happens because, in the middle of the party, attention wanes. The atmosphere of joy and relaxation makes us relax, and that's when criminals take advantage. So here's the tip. If you're going to enjoy a bloco or parade, pay attention to your belongings and always check your transactions before you leave. A little care can save you a lot of headaches. Number 5. Accidents and tragedies. Another dark part of Carnival, which many people prefer not to think about, is the accidents that happen during the party. This includes everything from floats tipping over, electric trios breaking down, people falling from dangerous heights, and even being run over. In Rio de Janeiro, there have already been cases of giant floats, which, when making a turn, overturned and injured several people. In São Paulo, there have been serious incidents of revelers falling from moving cars. In Salvador, the trios elétricos drag crowds, creating incredible scenes, but which can become dangerous when the organization fails. Often, the problem is inadequate maintenance. Other times, it's the poor design itself, because the car or trio was assembled in a hurry. And then there's overcrowding. Too many people push, run, fall, and the risk of trampling increases. What's worse is that when something like this happens, it takes a long time to get help because the streets are full and ambulances have trouble getting there. Number 6. Hospital overcrowding and chaos in public security. We come to a critical point, the impact on the health system and public safety. During the revelry, the number of emergencies skyrockets. There are people who have had too much to drink, fights, traffic accidents, hit and runs, and even people who fall ill because of drug use. The result? A gigantic overload in hospitals. Emergency rooms are full, with endless queues, especially in the big capitals. Health professionals have to deal with all kinds of situations, while resources become increasingly scarce. And as if that weren't enough, public safety also suffers. With the police concentrated on the blockos and parades, other areas of the city end up unprotected. This makes room for crime in more distant neighborhoods. And even where policing is reinforced, the crowded streets make the job difficult. Vehicles have problems getting around, and if an emergency occurs, such as a fire or a landslide, help can take a long time because of the blockades. At this time, the public health and safety system is stretched to the limit. As you can all see, Carnival is beautiful to watch the party in the streets, but behind it there are huge challenges that need to be faced. And that raises an important question. If everyone knows what's going on, why doesn't anyone do anything? Number 7. Attempts to put the mess in order. The truth is that not everyone is sitting on their hands in the face of these problems. The police, especially in big cities, step up their presence during Carnival, with checks, searches, and even security cameras at strategic points. City halls and the courts are also trying to monitor the accounts of the samba schools, demanding more transparency about investments and sponsorship. The problem is the size of the event. While inspectors are keeping an eye on 10 blockos, 100 others are taking place at the same time. And while they investigate one samba school for possible irregularities, new types of crime are already being articulated. When it comes to fighting criminal factions, the solution goes far beyond the streets. A broad strategy is needed, including police intelligence, prolonged investigations, collaboration between states, and even with other countries. After all, drug trafficking is not limited to Brazil. It is part of an international scheme. At the end of the day, Carnival reflects Brazil. It shows our joy, creativity, and lively culture, but it also exposes our inequalities, corruption, and violence. It's impossible to separate one from the other. Those who suffer most from the dark side of the festival are the poorest populations, who live in areas dominated by factions and other power schemes. Number 8. Economy. Of course, Carnival isn't just about problems. The festival also generates thousands of temporary jobs. Seamstresses, blacksmiths, carpenters, makeup artists, sound technicians, security guards, and street vendors all find opportunities during this period. Tourism explodes with hotels full, bars and restaurants raking in the big bucks, and many people earning extra money. In cities like Salvador and Rio de Janeiro, Carnival is the main source of tourist revenue for the year. Thousands of tourists plan vacations just to enjoy the party, spending on tickets, accommodation, tours, and tickets to cabins and parades. This helps to boost the local economy and, in a way, justifies public investment in the festival. The big challenge is to find a balance. How to maintain the grandeur and joy of Carnival without letting it fall into the hands of criminals? How can we continue to generate jobs and tourism revenue without ignoring the irregularities behind the scenes? Did you know about this darker side of Brazilian Carnival? Have you ever had a remarkable experience with the festival? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoy exploring the most extreme corners of the planet and discovering places that seem out of this world, keep an eye on Bello Mundo. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and turn on notifications. There are still many mysteries and incredible adventures waiting for you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.